What's happening, everybody? And thanks for tuning in to episode 250 of the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Today's guest is drummer Matt Thompson of King Diamond, and who also plays in Shaolin Death Squad, as well as a myriad of local bands in the Dallas, Texas area. Matt and I get into his work with King Diamond, his intense time studying at University of North Texas, and a whole lot more. So I hope y'all enjoy the combo as much as I enjoyed having it. Crash Bang Boom podcast can be found on iTunes, Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, and Amazon Music Podcast, to name a few. Feel free to check out any of the previous 240 plus episodes and give me a like, a subscription, and or a positive review, as the support is appreciated. And thanks to everyone who's been on the ride thus far. I hope to keep cranking them out and hope y'all keep tuning in. So without further ado, here we go. Matt Thompson, from King Diamond to blue collar local gigs and church gigs in between. Got to keep the chops up, y'all. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yeah! All right, I'm here with Matt Thompson of King Diamond, Shaolin Death Squad, and many more. Matt, what's happening, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing pretty good, man. Glad to be catching up with you. It'll be fun to talk to you about working with King Diamond throughout the years, and I know you've been playing local gigs. Are you in the Dallas area?
Yes, I live in Denton, which is just north of Dallas-Fort Worth.
Gotcha. Well, I guess with touring being down and et cetera, have you upped your local gigs? And if so, what are some of the local gigs that you've been playing in Texas?
Yeah, combination of no touring, plus my daughter is older now, a little more independent, so I can take more local gigs. I've been taking like some dance gigs and some country gigs, and I have a band called Rathmore, which is Celtic rock.
Oh, wow.
And we've been playing a bunch. Yeah, I have a church gig that I've done for almost 14 years now, and that's still going every Sunday.
Wow.
So I'm keeping busy.
Damn, man. You and drummer Bobby Jarson back playing country gigs. I believe, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's playing with George Strait now, which is hilarious because, like, if you went back to him playing in Spastic Inc., just shredding the shit out of the drums the entire time, and you're like, yeah, that guy's going to play with George Strait. You'd be like, no, he isn't. It's wild out there in Texas, man.
Well, there's another drummer here that came from Denton named Mitch Marine, and he was a shredder too. He played all kinds of music. He came out of UNT. He was Brave Combo's first drummer. I don't know if you know who Brave Combo is, but they're a polka band from Denton, from here. Crazy. And they've been playing since the 70s, and they're one of the top polka bands in the world.
Wow. With
multiple Grammys. And he was the first, if I'm not mistaken, he's the first Brave Combo drummer, and now he's playing with Dwight Yoakam.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's not so crazy, like those acts want to hire great drummers. They pay great, and they're really good gigs. They're really people friendly. They when they tour, it tends to be like 2 weeks on and then like a bunch of weeks off kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, interesting. With these local gigs, is that something that you did intermittently, or it sounds like maybe with your daughter, like you said, being a little more independent, coupled with the downtime from touring, is that something that has been more recent, or were you able to work touring around the church gig basically, and that was kind of what you came back to?
Well, I've always done local gigs in between tours, kind of like blue collar gigs I've done since the 80s.
Wow.
And I've been working in DFW Metroplex since early 90s.
Crazy.
When I first moved here, and doing all kinds of different music, and like my church gig, they're very cool. I'm still there because they're very cool with me touring and taking, sometimes I would take 3-4 months off at a time.
Right.
And they're cool with me coming back. Yeah, I'm really lucky for that.
Nice, man.
And also I teach at a private music school here in the city, and they're also cool with me touring.
You managed to work it out. That's pretty damn good, man.
Thank goodness.
I saw you kind of practicing rudiments on social media and stuff like that. Was that something that you've maintained throughout the years, or did that as well? I've talked to a lot of drummers that started getting back more so into rudiments and maybe revisiting some of that the sort of fundamental rudimental side of drumming during all that COVID. But is that something that you've always been pretty solid with keeping up with?
Yeah, I never stopped practicing since I was 12.
Crazy. Growing up, were you in like school-wise, were you in any, standard music or jazz classes or talented music, marching bands, et cetera, like that growing up?
Yeah, I was lucky. I grew up in New Jersey, and band started in fourth grade, and school drum lessons started in fourth grade. I started playing when I was in third grade, but
Wow.
I started taking school lessons in fourth. I was in band, concert band, all through middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school, and college, and then marching band in high school. And then I started with the jazz band, which is basically a big band.
Right.
Starting in sixth grade, and I stayed in jazz band every year since then, until I got out of high school.
Was the marching band, was it a pretty strong program? Because I did marching band as well, was in like talented music, did jazz music, did like you said, concert band. I did all that stuff, played in their little plays and whatnot, which I honestly hated doing. It's till to this day I'm like, nah, I'm not going to any theater shows. It instilled I just never liked it then, and I'm like, I can't do it now. But when with the marching band, was that a pretty good program for you?
Yeah, I'd say it was. I went to a high school in South Jersey. It was called Cherokee High School, and when I got there, the emphasis was more on the jazz band.
Okay.
We had a kind of one of the top bands, I guess, in the area, although there were definitely better bands.
Yeah.
But the marching band at that time was kind of looked at as a requirement, just to keep the band budget coming for the jazz band.
Yeah.
But it was still a good marching band. I don't think we sucked by any means, but we got a new director soon after I started high school, and he started placing a little more emphasis on the marching band. And we started competitions, and we generally got crushed.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I've spoken to a lot of drummers out of Jersey, and there's been no shortage of amazing people teaching lessons and everything else. And it's really like a pretty strong drum community. Haven't spoken to like so many guys that grew up in Jersey. So I didn't know that that's where you were from. I assumed you were a Texas guy, but that's interesting that, with all of those programs, because again, between watching you play like Rudiments and whatnot, and then going through like jazz independence exercises, I was trying to figure out, I wonder where this jazz thing started, especially as a guy that plays with like King Diamond, for instance. So it sounds like some of that jazz influence started quite early in doing some of the big band stuff in school. Is that right?
Well, early on, I started getting Modern Drummer magazine, like around fifth or sixth grade.
Yeah.
And I've always liked, I grew up with my mom. She was a musician, and she would play mostly classical musician. She was a violinist.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved all the music she played. My dad would play, when I went to visit my dad, he would play jazz and rock. And then in my neighborhood, the influence was mostly rock. And then I started playing jazz in elementary school and listening to it. And the reason I brought up Modern Drummer is because early on I read an interview with a drummer. I don't even remember who it was, but I remember him talking about being able to take all kinds of gigs because he got interested in a lot of different styles at an early age. And I decided at an early age that I was going to learn as much as I could about every single style.
Mm-hmm.
And if it didn't light a fire in me, I was going to find a way to make it light a fire in me, no matter what. So I think I had, from an early age, I just kind of studied every style I could. I never limited to any one style. I didn't want to put myself in a box because I guess I realized, I think it was from that article, that if I wanted to make a living playing drums, that I would have to be in a position to not have to turn down any gigs because I wasn't able to play the style.
Absolutely. Well, in the 80s and 90s, I was definitely kind of getting into those instructional videotapes around then, the VHSs. And, it was a lot of, I feel like Dave Weckl, Dennis Chambers, Steve Smith, all those guys sort of putting these instructional videos out, and aside from going out and like seeing shows at a young age, that was one way to sort of sit home and get schooled prior to taking any like drum set specific lessons that I took. But what were some of the drummers that maybe you were into, either in recorded form and or as sort of with the aforementioned VHS tape instructional world?
Well, that's a complicated question. Every drummer basically that you've heard of in the 80s or 90s, I would say influenced me, because I was obsessed with music from an early age. But some videotapes definitely stand out that I wore out. One was Frank Zappa, Does Humor Belong in Music, in the 80s, with Chad Wackerman. I wore that out. I wore out all the Frank Zappa I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
The Weckl tapes I watched. There was a Bozio tape I watched a lot.
Uh-huh.
Aldridge.
Yeah. Tommy Aldridge as well.
Later on in the 80s, the Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship videotape started coming out, and I wore those out, man.
Definitely.
And Gregg Bissonette stood out to me.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. I loved him with David Lee Roth. I could hear with David Lee Roth that this was a guy with more depth than would normally, I guess, most people on the surface would think. Yeah, okay, he's a rock drummer, but I could tell that he wasn't just that. And
right.
And also through the 80s, I started getting into Maynard Ferguson, and I came across Maynard Ferguson live in San Francisco. That had Gregg Bissonette on it. And I read an interview with Gregg Bissonette in Modern Drummer where he said he went to the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and I remember thinking, like, Denton, Texas, like, why would, like, was that like out in the desert, and there's like tumbleweeds blowing by? Like, why would anybody go to a serious music, like be serious about music, end up in Texas? That's so strange to me.
Right.
But I didn't know that was going to be prophetic, and I ended up at University of North Texas in Denton, and I ended up staying here, which is completely bizarre.
Right.
But anyway, that kind of stands out. I remember his performance on that Buddy Rich videotape, just really standing out, just being very musical. Yeah, I mean, I could just sit here and list influences for much longer than we have.
Right. Yeah, I bet, man. You mentioned University of North Texas, you go down there. Tell me a little bit about getting into that program and into that world. Was it more in depth than, did you feel like you were prepped pretty well to hang with it? Obviously I'm sure there were some challenges, but I guess just tell me maybe a little bit about what you sort of took away from however many years you were there in that school.
Well, that's again a complicated, open-ended question.
Yeah.
Well, I started playing professionally in New Jersey, and my goal was always to go to Berklee College in Boston, because our jazz program went there once a year for jazz festivals where all the jazz bands from the area would come and play and be adjudicated, and just to be influenced to that school. And it was kind of like a big advertising for the school. I won a scholarship to Berklee for best soloist. I think it was my senior year, I think it was my senior year.
Yeah.
And I had my sights setting on going to Berklee, and the problem was I was somewhat of a rebel in high school. My grades were abysmal. I had straight A's in my music classes, but everything else I just didn't care about.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get in there right away. So I started going to community college in New Jersey, and that was cool. But then I moved to Texas to play with a band. My aunt and uncle were managing an artist down here, and I moved down here to play with that artist. So I started gigging in Texas, and I found that I could make a pretty cool living just kind of playing gigs around here.
Wow.
And while I was here, I started noticing that in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there were drummers that just blew me away. There was a million of them, and they were everywhere. One was Keith Carlock, who I saw at 18.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, he just, every time he took a solo, he lost me. I didn't know where one was. And I was like, all right, this guy's freaking next level. And and there were just a bunch of others. The last straw was when I went to see Dan Wojciechowski. I don't know if you know who that is, but he ended up getting a gig with Olivia Newton-John and some others. Anyway, just one of the best in the world. And I was like, this is the last straw. What's going on? And I went up to Dan. I was like, why are there so many great drummers around here? And that's when he brought up University of North Texas and Ed Soph,
right?
Who's the drum set professor here at UNT. He retired, I think about 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow.
But I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And he suggested I go talk to Ed, and I did. And that's when I started checking out University of North Texas. And I learned that at the time, UNT's tuition for a semester was $1,400, and Berkeley at the time was $14,000
God.
for a semester.
Wow.
So at the time, I was in the process of getting my associate's degree, which I got here at community colleges in Dallas. And then I decided to pursue UNT, and I did. I graduated with very little debt.
Nice.
So the other part of the question was, what did I take away from UNT? What was I prepared? Yeah, I think I was prepared on a lot of levels. During my time in community colleges, I seeked out some teachers that had been there, and I started to get my marimba chops up a little bit, because when I was there, I don't know if it's that way anymore. I've been out 20 years, but the mallet requirements were pretty heavy, and the piano requirements.
Wow.
I think they still are.
Yeah.
So I'd started to prepare myself for that stuff. What I wasn't prepared for was how intense the band auditions were and the placement auditions.
Interesting. And it with Ed Soph there, because again, I've noticed so many great drummers that have come from there. It sounds like you were realizing the same thing in being down there and connecting those dots, getting a chance to finally sort of study with Ed. Was there any particular thing that he imparted to you, be it in a mantra or in drum application? I know that could probably be a pretty extensive answer as well, but I don't know if there's any particular thing that sort of stands out.
I learned a lot from Ed, mostly, I guess, technical kind of things. A lot about attitude, a lot about 100% commitment to the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were a lot of kind of mantras like that, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't my only teacher there. I had a few teachers. But yeah, I stayed with Ed for 3 of the 4 years that I was there.
Awesome. You did mention sort of the tryouts, auditions, et cetera. About how many people do you recall having sort of competing against, I guess, to get some of these spots, and how much time were you having to dedicate to be able to get through all that?
Well, the lab band auditions, when I was there, you had to have 6 semesters of making a lab band in order to graduate. And lab band consisted of, I think, 9 bands. There was the 1 o'clock through the 9 o'clock lab bands. And then there were a few other bands that satisfied lab band requirements. There was like an Afro-Cuban ensemble. There was a repertoire ensemble, which was like, that would play, every semester they would pick like maybe a Dixieland repertoire kind of thing, or maybe all bassy or something like that, you know. And,
right.
But these were all big bands, and I think they started relaxing it when I got out.
Yeah, that sounds intense.
Yeah, it was honestly brutal. I remember, when the years that I was there would be maybe 70 or 80 drummers going out for, let's say, 20 positions.
Oh, man.
And yeah, and there were guys there that had done all of their coursework, had satisfied all of their credits to graduate, except for lab band. Some of them needed 3 or 4 different, 3-4 semesters of lab band. They still had to go, and they were just there to audition.
Wow.
And they would audition semester after semester, and a lot of guys dropped, ended up dropping or changing their major because of that requirement.
Damn.
It was pretty brutal. The other thing was the piano proficiency test.
Oh.
At the end, you had to pass a piano proficiency test, and that sunk a lot of dudes too, man. I knew a couple guys who had done all their lab band and had done all their credit requirements and had only the proficiency to pass, and just couldn't do it, man. It was brutal. There was like, there were a bunch of different things on there that were really tough.
Wow. And you were able to get through all that then?
I did, actually. I remember counting the drummers. The first thing you did there was a methods class where everybody, all the percussion majors took it. I remember counting the jazz majors. 42 jazz majors started in my class, and only 2 of us ended up graduating.
Damn, dude.
It's attrition, right?
Oh my God, that's also a fairly abysmal pass rating or percentage for that matter. My God, that's like trying to get through like SEALs training percentages or something. That's crazy.
Yeah, I did think of it as kind of like a boot camp, and it was really, I credit the school for keeping it that way for so long because they took pride in their program and they wanted the degree to really mean something.
Yeah.
They didn't give degrees away, and there's some considered top programs in the country and the world that end up thinking of it like a business, and they want to pass people so that they don't discourage people from signing up and paying the tuition.
Wow.
Mm.
Damn, that's intense, man. So you go through all of these different phases. You've got the jazz background, this and that and the other. Were you keeping your ears? I mean, it sounds like, again, going back to what you had originally said and sort of keeping your ears tuned into many different styles of music. Were there any particular thrash bands from the Bay Area, or even, that early Brit wave between Maiden, Judas Priest, etc., that sort of also piqued your interest to where once you got into King Diamond that you had those influences, or did you have to cram a lot, or how did that go?
No, I mean, no, I didn't have to cram so much. I've always been into metal. Well, not always. At some point, I was born.
Yeah.
But I loved metal from an early age.
Okay.
I've been interested in everything I could figure out about it, and every style that came in. Yeah.
When you first started digging on some of that metal stuff, and you're playing at this point, are there any particular drummers or a drummer in particular that you feel as though was a key influence in sort of your development at that early age? Where because sometimes when you're starting out, you kind of maybe you'll gravitate towards something a little less complicated because you can grasp it, and then that inevitably becomes an influence in and of itself. So I don't know if that was an experience that you had.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a great point. All of them, what can I say, man?
Yeah.
I loved Tommy Lee.
Sure.
And I still do, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought his style was really unique and awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
That's going back, and to the early drummers. I mean, geez, I'll start talking and I won't be able to stop, dude. I mean, what do you want me to say? Like all the ones that normally stand out. I quit smoking cigarettes because of Dave Lombardo, and I heard Rain and Blood in '86.
Oh, wow.
That just screwed me all up when I heard Rain and Blood, and
yeah, for sure.
The bar has been been raised so many times since then, and it's still being raised today, faster and faster, man.
I know, boy, it really does get faster and faster. And I hear you on the Tommy Lee thing, man. I mean, I was born in '76, so in '83 when Shout at the Devil came out, I got it in '84, so maybe I'm 7 years old. But that was I didn't realize at the time maybe how much Tommy Lee's drumming on those records influenced me, and that one in particular, because one, the drums sound huge on it. His pocket's great. He was doing the cymbal catches. He just had a lot of style, and the whole band had a particular groove. So I'm with you on the Tommy Lee thing for sure. And like I said, Shout at the Devil was my introduction to that.
Yeah, I agree, dude. I mean, listen to just the kick drum on Shout at the Devil. It's
fucking massive.
It's unique and thunderous, musical and heavy all at the same time. It's beautiful, man.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how did a guy down in Texas play drums with an operatic Danish metal icon like King Diamond?
Through means of a long story. Well,
Yeah.
I was playing hardcore and death metal in New Jersey, and then, I was practicing metal when I came to Texas. I had a practice room, and let me try to shorten the answer out, because I was playing with a death metal band here in Dallas, and because of that, I ended up playing with a guy named Michael Harris. If you don't know about him, you should definitely check him out, man, because he's absolutely a brilliant guitar player and composer. And he's got a huge catalog. He's very prolific and has written a lot of stuff. And I was lucky enough that he chose me to play on his band that was called Surgeon. It's still called Surgeon, but it's just not active anymore. I played on Surgeon, and I was on one song on an album called Ego Decimation Profile, which actually had Keith Carlock and Rob Stankiewicz.
Wow.
And Clint Barlow on. It had 4 different drummers.
Damn.
Michael Harris started doing stuff and mixing stuff at a studio called Nomad Studios in Dallas, Carrollton, actually, which is where King was doing Merciful Fate and King Diamond at the time. A lot of his 90s stuff was done at Nomad. And the owner of Nomad is a good friend of mine named Gary, and was also is also a good friend of King's. And one day, this is when I was at UNT, but I was doing a lot of studio work at Nomad. One day, Gary said, "Hey, King, heard your drumming and thought you were a good drummer." Something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, if King ever needs a drummer, you tell him to call me.
Right.
And what ended up happening is I graduated UNT in August of 2000, and I was trying to decide LA or New York. I was going to go to one of those two, and there were a lot of different considerations for both.
Sure.
And I was having a hard time deciding. Anyway, 2 weeks after I graduated, King called me and wanted to meet with me, and that's when the ball started rolling with that. And then I ended up. When I met with him, he showed me the tour dates for the second half of the House of God tour, which was in Europe. And one thing I've always loved in my life is history. I've always been into primarily military history, but all kinds of history. And if you're into military history, then you've got to be fascinated with Europe, especially from a Western-centric kind of point of view.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was looking at the countries, and I was like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. It was basically every country in Europe and Russia, and some like Eastern Europe and Turkey, and you name it. I couldn't believe it, man.
Wow.
So yeah, that was it.
That's wild, man. You mentioned for a second there just that you were kind of into doing some death metal stuff here, and one of the guys that's been mentioned from New Jersey is this guy Brandon Thomas, who played with Ripping Corpse, and he's one of those guys. But just as a sort of sidebar, were you getting into like the Florida stuff between Cynic and like what Death was putting out with Sean Reinert and Gene Hoglan? Were those guys?
Yeah, completely, man. Sean Reinert just changed my whole concept. I don't know if I would say he changed my whole concept, but he showed me. He showed the world what could be brought to metal. Sean, Gene Hoglan, I love. He was definitely part of it, but Sean was the one that spoke to me the most back then, as far as just that kind of virtuosity and different styles to death metal.
Yeah, for sure.
And that stuff I started getting into a little bit more right after I moved to Dallas. I got turned on to them by some of the guys I was playing with down here, as well as like Carcass.
Right.
Carcass was a huge thing.
Yeah.
Like Symphonies of Sickness, and it was just, oh my God, man, just changed everything.
I hear you.
Along with a million other bands that goes with. That just starts a conversation of like 40 other bands that should be mentioned.
Yeah. It's funny. I talked to Dan Wilding, who's now the drummer of Carcass, and he talked about sort of their influence on him and learning some of those playing aspects. And now, being the drummer that sort of is the continuation of all that inspiration, and playing those songs that he knew growing up, and then the new ones that he's been a part of writing and everything. So I guess once you get into the band, you've got a pretty long back catalog of those songs, specific style, etc. I think another aspect is sort of what I mentioned with influence. When you have to study a whole back catalog, some of that playing seeps into your own playing, and maybe subconsciously you're sort of channeling that. But did you feel like you needed to be sort of a continuum, or were you comfortable to sort of take it your own way when you got into King Diamond?
Well, no, I would say King Diamond, I think, needs to be played in the pocket.
Yeah, for sure.
Or as close to it as I can get, anyway.
Yeah.
And the early Carcass for me was very organic. There's a lot of death metal that I love so much because it's like anti-click.
Right.
There's a pocket to it. There's a groove, but it breathes so much.
Sure.
Different riffs come in at different speeds for many different reasons, and that's part of the beauty of it. Like that early Carcass and Macabre comes to mind. But the thing that I'm talking about in that early death metal, I think, is different than the approach I would need to take with King Diamond. And modern Congress is like that too. It's a lot different than early Congress.
Right.
They've
Yeah,
evolved a lot.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, with the early King Diamond stuff, I mean, you've got a lot of that sort of shuffling double bass grooves. I would say the metal gallop. There was a good bit of that stuff. So I guess, did you, when just writing your parts, for instance, did you feel as though you're at a clean slate, or did you feel as though there was some of that that you sort of maybe needed to represent? If you know what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a whole nother complicated question. But as far as like the galloping thing that you're talking about, Mickey D is the drummer on those first 4 albums.
Yeah.
And everything he plays has got a certain kind of great swing to it.
Uh-huh.
Even the songs that are in, like, I'd say straight eighths, but yeah, there's kind of a swing to everything. So relearning his parts, specifically for the tunes that we played live was just great, man. It was great. I think it definitely made me a better drummer, just checking out like his concept of orchestration. I think he just has this natural ability to develop a song in a unique way, a very musical way.
Right, totally. I mean, when composing your drum parts, do you stick verbatim to fills that are on the recording, for instance? Not necessarily those original parts, and maybe you do that as well. But do you have some freedom maybe within your fills to where it's not just completely full or through composed, or how do you work that out?
Live, I think that there are things that need to be there, definitely. Drummer that stands out the most that kind of hit me to this concept that I'm about to talk about is Tony Williams.
Of course.
The way Tony kind of educated me, and something that informs my concept, is not that it always works out, but for someone who's not looking for virtuosity, and someone who's not a drummer, someone who just wants to bang their head, there's certain things that have got to be there.
Right.
And the way Tony did it was like, you could bounce your head, I don't think I should say bang your head to Miles Davis, but
Yeah.
there's always a bounce to it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean, it's the same to me, but there's a bounce, and it's a thing that's on the surface that everybody can grab onto, relate to, and it makes them feel the music. But underneath the surface, if you pry open the box a little bit, there's this amazing virtuosity there. So that's kind of what I go for. So I try to keep the things that are really important, like the bounce. A lot of Mickey D did a lot of Neil Peart influence, like digga-digga-ding stuff, on the bell.
Right.
Obviously, that stuff has to be there. Certain fills have to be there. I don't have a lot of freedom with the opening to Welcome Home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, things like that need to be there. But underneath the surface, like fucking with like ghost notes, or like different little inflections here and there that push the music along, I have complete freedom with.
Right.
You know what I mean? But as long as those important things are there, I guess the answer is yes, I do have some freedom.
Nice. Gotcha. Now, with drum solos, is that something that you've done fairly consistently throughout the years with King Diamond?
No, not actually. I did drum solos in Europe in 2006.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it was just like a short thing, like a 2-minute long thing. They gave me 2 minutes. It had to do with, I think, guitar changes and stuff. But
yeah.
And then in 2012 and 2013, I also did a short one, I think, for the same kind of reason.
Yeah.
But then after that, we just went to all music.
Gotcha. Do you miss playing big rock solos, even if it's for only 2 minutes?
Honestly, I don't, man.
Yeah.
I would say if King wanted a drum solo back in the set, then obviously I would say yes. I would welcome it and do my best. But from an audience perspective, I think, and this is just my opinion, I don't think they're really there to see me, in that capacity. I think they're there to see King Diamond music.
Right.
I think that if there was some kind of reunion and, Mickey came back and they did a tour or something, then I think a drum solo would be welcomed.
Right.
because he's considered one of the original members, even though I've been in for so long. But
Yeah.
I just think it's a different thing.
Right. Well, man, coming up in 2022, are there any touring plans, any records that you have coming out, anything that you're pumped on? What's going on going forward? What you can talk about, at least, I could say.
I feel like I can talk about the things that have been said in interviews so far. It's common knowledge that Merciful Fate is going to be playing a string of dates next summer. They were supposed to play summer of 2020, and that got pushed back to 2021, and that got pushed back to 2022.
Right.
The plans on Merciful Fate have pushed back King Diamond stuff, obviously till after that.
Right.
So, but I mean, I'm not like bitter or anything. I think it's awesome for the fans that Merciful Fate is going to play again. I know they've wanted it for a long time.
Sure.
And I think that they're going to do great in the festivals that they're on. I hope to catch them in Vegas if that show happens again. They're scheduled to play Psycho Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Which is an awesome festival.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I love it, man. I had a great time when King played there. But then King is planning, last I talked to him, and I think he's mentioned in interviews, to tour King Diamond after Merciful Fate plays.
Gotcha.
So hopefully soon after that.
Yeah.
And King has plans for another album next year, as well as plans for another Merciful Fate album.
Wow.
I talked to King a couple months ago, and he shows no signs of slowing down. He still sounds as fired up as the first year that I played with him.
That's wild.
That
is truly wild.
It's amazing considering what he's been through and how long he's been going.
Yeah, and the vocal range that he has to approximate live, like just to revisit all that stuff. And it's not like he was doing himself any favors being young singing like that. And then flash forward many years later, you still got to do that stuff. It's incredible that he can still do it.
I'll be honest with you, that the last tour we did is the best I've ever heard him.
Unbelievable.
I don't get it, but that's what it is.
Yeah. That is wild. And then I guess just more local gigs, continuing to do the church thing, everything else, and just counting down to going back out, huh?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, my priority is my family. I have a wife, and stepkids, and my daughter, and kind of everything I do serves that. I love playing gigs, and I love being a musician, and I have no plans to stop doing that at all.
Yeah. Hell yeah, man. Right on. Well, man, Matt, it was fun talking to you. Appreciate the insight into the early years as well as all the King Diamond material and gigs and everything in between. So that was fun talking to you, man. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely. All right, that does it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to Matt for rapping with me. I loved hearing about the trial-by-fire nature of his time at University of North Texas. That shit was intense. As always, we'll catch y'all on the next one. Tune back in. Crash, bang, boom.